Wheelchair coming in, that's incoming.
In the spring of 2009, American immigration officers entered the home of John Demjaniuk, a retired auto worker from Cleveland, Ohio. At the age of 89, he's being forcibly deported to stand trial in Germany.
Chuck, you got his jacket?
Yes, I have his jacket right here.
It's alleged that 65 years ago, Demjaniuk was complicit in 29,000 murders as a Nazi concentration camp guard during the Second World War.
The back is bad, I know.
Until now, he's been the world's most wanted Nazi war criminal. With Demjaniuk in custody, there's just a handful of others left, many of them scattered across Europe. Most are now in their 90s. I wanted to see if we could find some of these men before it's too late, to see if they take this last chance to go on record to give their version of events. I'm taking a camera and a colleague, Izzy, who unlike me speaks German.
Mein Name ist Frau Charman. Ich rufe von der BBC in London an.
Most of these men were our age when they were involved in Hitler's Third Reich. It made us want to understand why they'd collaborated with such a vicious regime. How would they live with themselves ever since? And would they be able, after all these years, to justify the actions of their youth? In 2008, during the European Football Championships, the Sun newspaper found Milivoje Asner, now the second most wanted Nazi in the world, watching a game of football in the small town of Klagenfurt in southern Austria. After the war, Milivoje Asner changed his name to George Aschner, escaping prosecution and living peacefully for almost 60 years in Austria. Now aged 96, he's avoiding trial on the grounds of senility. We've written to Asner to see if he'll meet us. Unexpectedly, he's invited us to his home.
He said we can go and see him. But then the fact that every time I speak to him he doesn't remember ever having spoken to me before, and any time I've made any attempt to make an arrangement, he seems to have no grasp of that arrangement. So what, if actually we have arranged to see him, I don't know. Who knows?
You have reached your destination.
After a long drive, we arrive at his flat with no idea of what we're going to find. There's no answer. Has he forgotten our arrangement? Or is he avoiding us? We decide to leave him a note and try again in the morning, but then we're startled by a neighbour.
She knows everything about their lives. He's not really called Dr. Aschner. Also saying that he is actually very fit. So they go out every lunchtime for lunch. They go out every evening for dinner. They drink a litre of red wine every meal. And that she said you'll see them if you watch. She said, she was saying we could stand and wait for them, and we'd see them. They're very fit and healthy.
So they put it on.
Well, she was implying. She was saying that he's actually very clever and he's all there. She was talking about circumstances where she's kind of helped them out around the house, that he is actually very sharp and, knows exactly what's going on and what he wants. And she also said that they don't let anyone in and any journalists in, so... But she said she'd tell them if she saw them, that two very nice young English people were looking for them. So, yeah. She wished us luck.
Asner was a chief of police in the newly formed state of Croatia when the country gained its independence in 1941 in exchange for supporting the Nazis. It's alleged that under this new regime, Asner was in charge of signing deportation orders, sending hundreds of Jews, Serbs and Gypsies to Nazi concentration camps. At the time, Asner was just 28, the same age as me. I can hardly imagine what his world as a young man must have been like. What would drive him to collude with a brutal regime like the Nazis? We go back to Asner's flat early the next morning. This time, to our surprise, we're let in. Immediately we're struck by just how empty the apartment is, how few personal possessions Asner seems to have.
Wie heißt sie?
Heißt Setz.
Wer?
Unser Hase.
Wer hat diese Haare für Ihnen gekauft? Oder haben...
Den?
Ja.
Meine Frau hat sie.
Was denn?
Diesen Leben da. Möchten Sie was trinken? Hast du Pisse?
Ich habe Whisky.
Ja, Whisky. Wollen Sie ein bisschen Whisky? Komm.
Ja, habe ich.
Early. We normally have tea. So
Die trinken nur Nachmittag.
Na, die trinken mit mir.
Ja, ich kann mir die Gläser.
Ja. Du auch mit.
it's only 10 in the morning, but having finally got in, neither of us feel like we can turn down his offer of neat whiskey.
Ich kann nicht so viel
Ja,
trinken.
gut, ich will Sie kennen. So, dann geben wir den. Gila.
Das ist Kroatien.
Kroatisch, ja. Ja. Weil ich bin Kroate.
Können Sie sich daran erinnern, als die
Ja.
Nazis in Kroatien angekommen sind, oder?
Ja, überall sind sie angekommen. Die Nazis waren hier verhasst in Kroatien, weil das waren Großdeutsche. Und die Großdeutschen waren sehr, sehr grob.
Är det så att Sverige nog unter den Deutschen? Wir sind ja nicht mehr.
Ja, nein, aber meine, wir haben Freiheit wollen wir.
Also wir haben in diese Artikel sind,
Ja.
ich habe, jemand sagt, dass Sie verantwortlich sind für die Deportationen von Leuten außer Ihrer Stadt.
Und wem?
Also ich habe gelesen, dass Sie, dass Sie verantwortlich für Deportationen in der Stadt waren. Also ich sage nicht, was
Wellenstadt.
Ihre Heimat, wo Sie gewohnt haben.
Ja, ja.
Was denken Sie von dieser...
Das ist falsch, weil meine Heimat war das. Hier, wo wir hier sitzen, da bin ich geboren, aufgewachsen und so weiter. Bitte?
Du bist ja nicht da geboren, du warst ein Kroate.
Ja, das war kroatische Stadt.
Ja.
Ja, selbstverständlich.
Immer Österreich, da wo wir wohnen.
Ja, aber meine Eltern waren Kroaten.
Ja.
Das ist wichtig. Ne?
Having drunk several glasses of whiskey, it's hard to know quite what's going on. His neighbour had said he was very sharp, So we wonder if Asner is playing up his senility, using us to show the world that he's too old to stand trial. 1 minute, he seems genuinely disorientated. The next, he's drinking heavily, as if to erase any memories of the past.
Weil
Wenn sich dann erinnert, was geschehen ist damals, weißt du noch?
na, ich nicht. Ich bin dafür, dass wir müssen nur Gutes wünschen. Was war wahr?
Gutes.
Nur Gutes sagen, es lebe Freiheit.
Ja.
Das ist für mich. Was brauche ich da 10-mal bitten und so weiter? Jeder.
Croatia's independence had come at the price of collaboration, and we wondered if Asner had felt like he had to collaborate in order to keep his job, or even save his own skin. He still seems to think he's fighting for Croatia's freedom, even now. Or maybe it's his own freedom he's fighting for, confined to his empty flat, trapped in the confusion of his own mind. Whatever the truth of Asner's situation, he certainly isn't going to be able to give us the answers we're looking for. As a frail 96-year-old, it's possible to see why some people say he should never be made to stand trial. At the end of the war, the architects of Hitler's Third Reich were prosecuted at Nuremberg. Since then, there have been over 1,000 lesser-known Nazi war crimes trials for those further down the chain of command.
Number 1 sentences you, Victor Brack, to death by hanging. May God have mercy upon your soul.
The Simon Wiesenthal Center, the organization set up to help bring Nazis to justice, is still pursuing their list of the top 10 most wanted men. We've come to Hungary, where Dr. Efraim Zurov, the Wiesenthal Center's chief Nazi hunter, is holding a press conference to root out the new number 1 on their list, a man who by all accounts is far more lucid than Asner.
I want to go to the main reason that we're here today, and that is the case of Sandor Capiro. Sandor Capiro, as many of you know, was one of the officers who organized the razzia, the mass murder of Jews, Serbs, and Gypsies in Novi Sad, Serbia. There is an ongoing criminal process, they mean investigation, against Dr. Sandor Capiro, ex-Royal Hungarian Army Gendarmerie captain. This is basically why I'm here, to appeal to the Hungarian government to do what it has to do. In other words, they might have hoped that Sandor Capiro would die and do them all a favor. But as you can all see, Sandor Capiro is not cooperating. He's not dying, has no intention of dying. So the time has come for the government to do the right thing and do it immediately. Thank you very much.
Do you ever feel any sympathy for Mr. Capiro, who's in his 90s?
He's the last person on earth who deserves any sympathy. In other words, you're not supposed to look at him now and see a 94-year-old. You're supposed to look at him and think of a young man in his prime who had no compunction about organizing the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children. That's what you should look at. That's what you should see now. Don't be fooled by the wrinkles.
Like Asner, Sandor Capiro was a career policeman when Hungary entered the war on the side of the Nazis. He too would have had to collaborate in order to keep his job. It's alleged that in 1942, as a 29-year-old gendarme, Capiro was in charge of organising the identity checks of 1,400 undesirables. Over 3 days, men, women and children were rounded up and then shot into the frozen waters of the Danube. This event became known as the Massacre of Novi Sad. We've used the same approach as we did with Asner, writing a polite letter to Capiro asking if we can meet him, and it seems to have worked. So we found a local journalist called B, who'll be our Hungarian translator, and we're on our way to the home of the most wanted Nazi in the world.
Wunderbar. Ich habe eine Überraschung.
Was denn?
Ich habe eine wunderbare ungarische Essen präpariert gestern Nachmittag. Hier bei mir. Mit Sauerkraut.
Dankeschön.
After the war, like many caught up in Nazi war crimes, Capiro fled to the safe haven of South America, spending 50 years in Argentina. He returned to Hungary, his homeland, in 1996 to live out his final years. Having turned down requests for other interviews in the past, we're wondering if Capiro also sees this as an opportunity to present himself in a good light.
I am happy, very happy to see
us.
all to see. Kabátot szabad. Nem lopom el, csak felakadtom.
Nincs mit ellopni rajta.
Beteszem, még van egy füldugó, mert jobban hallok. Bocsánat. Old man. Mit parancsolnak inni?
What would you like to drink?
Én tudok ajánlani egy keveréket, amit Argentinában tanultam, Martini, Camparival és vízzel.
Martini, Campari and water.
Okay, but not too strong.
Drink.
Yes. Once again, we find ourselves drinking with a man accused of war crimes. It's more than a little uncomfortable, but we're in his home and feel obliged to follow his lead.
Chin chin. Salud. Spanish salud. Chin chin.
Capiro is putting so much effort into being charming and hospitable that I'm wondering how we're ever going to bring up his past.
Aperitif. Én nagyon hívő ember vagyok. Isten hívő ember. Én meg vagyok győződve, hogy a háborút is úgy vészeltem át, hogy nem lett semmi bajom. Érintetlen vagyok, azt lehet mondani. Aki nekem rosszat csinált az életben, az nagyon mindig megszenvedte az ellenem elkövetett gazemberséget.
So he thinks you'll go to heaven.
Úgyhogy úgy gondolja, hogy a mennyországban...
Nem gondolok a mennyországban. A túlvilági életre nem gondolok.
És mit gondol arról, hogy mi van a halál után?
Tessék?
Mi van a halál után? Mi van a túl?
Nézze, én azt hiszem, csak gondolom, hogy ez Istennek nem egy játéka, mondjuk a teremtés nem egy játéka. Itt valaminek mindig van valami célja és rendeltetése. És nincs semmi se hiába.
Mint ahogy valójában csinált, ez mi lenne?
Igazán nem gondolkoztam. De én nagyon szerettem csendőr lenni, és én hivatást éreztem.
But I loved being a gendarme officer, and that was my
Én
vocation.
szívesen csinálom, én nem pénzért
I loved
dolgoztam.
doing it, and I didn't do it for money.
He's talking about his years as a gendarme, as if his record is completely untarnished. But he's playing the part of the host so well that neither Izzy nor I pick him up on it.
Beautiful, Lizzie.
Sie sagen alle Mädchen, dass sie schön sind.
Nein,
Nein.
nicht alle sind nicht schön, alle nicht schön.
Dann danke
Alle
ich.
sind nicht schön. Einige, ja.
Dann ich danke Ihnen. Ich hole meine Tasche.
The same naive approach we've used to get into his front room has stopped us getting any answers to the difficult questions we've come here to ask. At 94 years old, Capiro seems entirely lucid, and I get the impression he knows exactly what's going on.
Goodbye. Very nice to meet you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I can't understand why, as the world's most wanted Nazi, he's not on trial. But I get the sense that the political will to prosecute Capiro just isn't there. After the war, Hungary endured a brutal communist dictatorship for 40 years. In comparison, for Hungary, the Nazi era was relatively short-lived. Germany, in contrast, has been completely defined by the crimes of the Third Reich. 60 years on, Germany is still dealing with its past. We're on our way to Munich, where what's been billed as the last Nazi war crimes trial is taking place. We want to see what it might be like if Asner or Capiro were ever brought to trial. The man being tried, Joseph Scheungruber, was arrested in 2008. We've come to meet the person who formally identified him, his nephew.
I was knowing, this is my uncle. This is not any Josef Scheungruber in Germany. Then they asked me, is this your uncle? Why should I not tell the truth? I must say yes. He is my uncle. If you have done a crime, you are responsible. And this is a very normal fact. If you stole something in a supermarket, you are responsible. I will say it very clear. Germany is responsible for the World War II and for the Holocaust. And the victims, all victims, every victim, not only in Germany, has a right of justice.
It's alleged that in 1944, Joseph Scheungruber ordered his men to murder 14 Italian civilians, 11 of them locked in a barn and burnt alive. When we meet Scheungruber at the courthouse, he's already been on trial for 6 months. Surrounded by a team of lawyers, he looks exhausted.
Eigentlich schon. Weißt du, Scheungruber-mäßig wird auch nicht besonders gut. Gestern ist ja eingeschlafen. Ja.
Also bitte regst mich auf, wenn du einschlafen.
Ja, dann wegmachen.
Ich kann nichts dafür.
Ja, vor allen Dingen bei dem Geschichtsunterricht.
Ich hab gar nicht mehr gewusst, wo man es nicht kann.
At 90 years old, Scheungruber is one of the oldest men ever to stand trial for Nazi war crimes. He regularly falls asleep in court, and often his hearing aids don't work with the court speaker system. With few surviving witnesses to the events of 65 years ago, today the court is trying to establish which group of soldiers might have been responsible for the murders of the 14 civilians, by working out what colour uniforms they were wearing at the time.
Und wir haben in diesem Verfahren unter anderem den Verdacht, dass der Mord an den 14 Zivilisten, um den es hier geht, dass die eventuell gar nicht auf deutsches Konto geht, sondern auf Konto der Schwarzen Brigaden. Weil mehrere der italienischen Augenzeugen nämlich von Soldaten in schwarzen Uniformen sprechen. Und schwarze Uniformen haben ausschließlich Angehörige der Schwarzen Brigaden getragen. Die SS trug im Gegensatz zu dem, was immer populär geglaubt wird, Fleckentarnung.
This is potentially the last ever Nazi war crimes trial, and they're using a children's book to identify soldiers for events that are so long ago, nobody's quite sure what they saw. Every few hours the court adjourns to give Schoengraber a break on the grounds of his health, but no one seems to object that he always goes straight to the bar. Schoengraber's decided to stand silent before the court, and frustratingly, that also means he won't talk to us. But we are getting the sense that for the people who regularly attend the court, this trial is hugely important.
Well, everybody here grows up hearing about the Nazi crimes in school in history class, and it's only later that you realize that it's not history, the history is not closed yet, it's not over yet, it's still going on, there's still people who are responsible for those crimes. And if you have the possibility to do a trial about one of those people, then I think it's important to do it.
Das ist völlig unmöglich und nicht gerechtfertigt, weil ich habe auch im Krieg auf Menschen geschossen. Und wenn man mir heute jetzt einen Vorwurf rausmacht, dann kann ich nur sagen, ich habe damals Soldat werden müssen, bin es geworden und habe als Soldat meine Pflicht erfüllt. Und heute versuche ich auch noch meine Pflicht zu erfüllen, aber ein Schuldgefühl kann man da nicht ableiten.
We wondered if Schoengraber is in some way being used as a symbol for the collective guilt of a nation. But there are some who are angry that Germany feels any guilt at all. It's the weekend before the 120th anniversary of Hitler's birth. Across Germany, there's a handful of neo-Nazi gatherings, each met with strong anti-fascist counter-demonstrations. Here in Düsseldorf, one of the most charismatic speakers of the far right has taken to the podium.
Und die Sieger sind immer die Guten und die Verlierer, in diesem Fall die Deutschen, vor allen Dingen in den Weltkriegen, das sind die ganz bösen Täter. Und es ist schon merkwürdig, dass die da hinter uns schreien, alles besser wissen als diejenigen, die die Zeiten erlebt haben.
Wieder Deutschland!
Bashila Haverbeck has been a champion of the far right for decades. As a leader in the Hitler Youth, who later married a senior member of the Nazi administration, she spent most of her life immersed in Nazi ideology. She's clearly not afraid of speaking her mind, and she's been arrested several times for denying the Holocaust. She's invited us to her house so we can talk openly about her beliefs.
You lead the way?
Yes, I lead, of course I must lead the way. You couldn't.
You have a very big house.
Yes.
Have you always lived here?
Yes, all people who lived with me here are dead. This is my husband.
When did your husband die?
99. Here. That's when I was 7 and my sister 5.
Which one are you?
Had very long plates, do you say it? And all these pictures and books I took when we had to leave our home by horse cart.
When did you have to leave your home?
45 in January, when the Russians came.
What was it like?
We always thought we'd come home again. We can turn back. Nobody believed that it would be forever. It is forever.
In the aftermath of war, Haverbeck, like many Germans, lost her home and was forced to travel across Europe from east to west. Thousands died all around her. She believes that during the war the suffering of the Germans was at least equal, if not worse, to the suffering of the Jews, and that the estimated 6 million who died has been vastly exaggerated. As such, she doesn't believe that there was a planned genocide of the Jewish people.
Yes, my gloves.
For the last 40 years, Haverbeck's taught Nazi ideology from an academy built on the edge of her land. In 2008, it was shut down by the authorities for breaking German law as a centre for Holocaust denial.
This was a schoolhouse house with 2 classrooms, and every classroom had 4 Jahrgänge. What is Jahrgänge?
Year groups.
Pardon?
Year groups.
Yeah, from 6 to 10 and from 10 to 14. This is a big seminar room, and they have taken out everything. It's just an empty room now. But you can't see anything through it. They just closed it. They didn't like the political aspect. They didn't like Holocaust denier. They didn't like because... But I really think what they didn't like, that people had the opportunity here to meet without being politically correct.
Why did they close it?
Because it's forbidden. Because it's dangerous. I am the speaker of the society and I'm so dangerous.
Haverbeck believes that the current world recession makes now the time for a resurgence of Nazi ideas.
I would say National Socialism is a better way than capitalism or communism. That is quite clear, that I would say. Because economy as it is now is deadly. It's really deadly to the earth and to the human beings. We see it now.
I realise that none of the alleged Nazi war criminals we've met have actually professed Nazi beliefs. They were members of the police or the army, collaborators or facilitators, but not necessarily believers. Haverbeck, on the other hand, really is a last remnant of the Third Reich.
This is the film that was shown at the Nuremberg trial as evidence, and the Allied cameramen filmed what they found, and this was the footage that was then shown.
Mm-hmm. You must show then the children at the same time the suffering of the 50 million who were driven from their home.
It doesn't matter if other people suffered as well. This is...
No, in Germany you don't see that. And in no school book you find the Germans driven away. You only find such pictures. That's true. These pictures, exactly, I would say that were we when we went on horse carts away.
Haverbeck's belief that the Holocaust is exaggerated or in any way comparable to her own suffering as a refugee made us feel like we had to challenge her.
It's a camp that was built to house people that they didn't want living amongst the normal population. It's been constructed on a massive scale to eradicate a race.
Even in our schools, you always see these pictures, always the same. Think if your parents have always been told to you to be murderers, what would you think about them?
What if they were? What if they were?
They were not murderers, all of them. Not at all. Do you think it's right to show children always these pictures? Do you think that's right?
I think it's important.
Yeah.
Because this happened in your lifetime. This happened 60 years ago. That's not that long ago.
Yes, but if nobody in Britain would have shown every day or every year to the children how the Irish people suffered under British government. Nobody would do that to the children because it destroys the children's soul.
What does it make you think when you see him again?
I ask why they are always shown. And only this kind of pictures.
Does it make you uncomfortable to watch those images?
I have seen them so many times. It's nothing new for me. Of course you don't want to see these things. They make you uncomfortable. It's true. I have seen them on the road when we came a horse cart from east to west. So it's I don't need pictures for it. I've seen them in original.
Confronting Haverbeck made us realise that perhaps by letting the people we've met speak so freely, we've failed to properly challenge any of them about their role in the crimes of the Nazi era.
I feel very frustrated that, whether because of their age or because they can't talk freely because they're accused of, or because they've written histories in their head that write out anything that, is not to be proud of. But yeah, I just feel like we haven't really had one totally honest, open conversation with anyone.
Sandor Capiro is the world's most wanted Nazi war criminal. We're determined to find out more about the legacy of his role in the Novi Sad massacre. But when we arrive, his doorbell has been vandalised and we can't get in.
That must be it's been destroyed.
Eventually, a neighbour opens the door. Three years ago, the Hungarian media was full of allegations that Capiro, as an officer in the wartime gendarmerie, was in charge of identifying families who were rounded up and then executed on the banks of the River Danube.
Ein bisschen geht noch. Bon dia.
Hello, good morning.
Good day
Yes, good day.
Good day. Yes.
Good day.
Good day.
Good day.
Jó napot.
Jó napot. Bon dia, spaniel, Spanish.
Today, he's got a law student with him, and oddly, she seems to be a bit of a fan.
Éva az én titkár mindenbe nagyon sokat segít. Igazolványba való fényképek.
És ezt a táskájában volt, jó? Yes. hogy milyen volt az, amikor ezekre a dolgokra fény derült a Sándor bácsival kapcsolatban?
Hát úgy ért minket, mint derültékből a villámcsapás ez a dolog,
2006. Szeptember végén az összes nagyobb folyóirat, rádió, televízió, tehát a teljes média elkezdte, tehát híradások jelentek meg arról, hogy a Wiesenthal központ találta egy háborús bűnöst, és úgy kezelték az egész esetet, mintha bizonyított lenne az ő bűnösséget.
How have people reacted to you after this?
Borzalmas, most elmesélem, orvosnál voltam, éppen jövök haza nyugodtan az utcán, legalább 20 újságíró ordította az utcán, háborús bűnös, háborús bűnös, háborús bűnös. Itt az utcán, itt kint. Borzalmas érzés. Nem is igaz, mert én nem öltem meg senkit.
Did they know what they were rounding up people for?
Katonák nem árulták el. Hát ez a titokba ment az egész, még az odaszállításunk is titokba ment.
It was all in secret. Also, we were transported there in secret.
Nem tudtuk, hogy hova és miért megyünk oda.
We didn't even know where we were going and why.
Nálam nem volt egy fegyverhasználat sem. Semmi.
Nothing.
A igazoló bizottság és a Levente otthonban lévő katonai vezetés, nem a csendőri, a katonai vezetés teherautóra tette fel, akiket nem igazoltattak, kivitték a Dunapartra, és ott a folyamőrök csinálták a vérfürdőt. Azt nem a csendőrség csinálta, hanem a honvédség csinálta az egészet. Hogy lehetek én bűnös azért, ami történt Vietnámban?
Does he ever wonder what would have happened if he'd refused to take people's?
Az a háború alatt nem lehetett, engem egy razziába tettek be. Nekem a parancsot teljesíteni kellett, a razziában részt kellett venni, az volt a hivatás. Most 65 év után mit mondjak?
What shall I tell you 65 years ago?
Mit mondjak 65 év után? Leéltük az életünket, most veszik elő, most kezdik elő. Én nem érzem magam bűnösnek ebbe.
I don't feel guilty in that.
Maybe because he was just doing his job, not carrying out an ideological conviction, Capiro doesn't see himself as being a part of the murder of those 1,400 civilians.
He should feel the weight of it. He should feel the weight that he was there somewhere where terrible things, where a massacre happened very near.
He puts himself at the scene of the crime, accepts complicity, yet denies any guilt. As far as I can see, Capiro is quite capable, but shows no remorse. One of the last alleged Nazi war criminals ever to be brought to justice, Joseph Scheingruber also denies the charges against him and has so far refused to speak in court or to us. But with the trial entering its 6th month and with no sign of a conclusion, Scheingruber's suddenly decided he's ready to talk. We follow him and his lawyer to the underground car park of the courthouse. They're going to take us somewhere where we can interview him. sehr müde jetzt, ja?
Ich kann nichts mehr. Ich muss das sagen. Da wollte ich schon wieder mal dabei.
Where are you taking us? Wie viele Kilometer ist das von hier? 12 kilometers from here. We're driven to a small town on the outskirts of Munich, where Scheungrubber and his wife have lived ever since the end of the war. Sie waren Bürgermeister hier?
Zweiter Bürgermeister.
So a very respected member of the community.
After a 45-minute drive, we arrive to find another one of Scheungrubber's lawyers waiting for us. We've got no idea what's going on.
Hallo. Da kennen wir uns. Ja. Das ist eine andere Form von England, geht ja? Das ist uns begegnet.
Da geht's weiter, ist kalt.
Wir haben uns immer die Engländer anders vorgestellt. Die schaut aus wie alle von uns, geht ja?
Scheungrubber, a former German army officer, is accused of ordering the murder of 14 Italian civilians in revenge for an attack on his men at the end of the war. He's already been found guilty in absentia by an Italian military court. We'd thought he'd brought us here to talk to us freely, but bizarrely his legal team have prepared a series of questions and answers for us to read out. It's all a bit surreal, but we feel obliged to go along with it.
Weißt, es verdeckt ein ganzes Gesicht, wenn du das so nimmst. Bitte, ja?
Herr Scheungrubber, Sie sind wegen Verdachts einen 14-fachen Mord bei einem Rückzug aus Italien im Juni 1944 befohlen zu haben, von dem Münchner Schwurgericht angeklagt worden. Das Verfahren läuft noch. Das, nachdem Sie vorher in 3 Instanzen zu lebenslänglich von italienischen Militärgerichten in La Spezia und Rom verurteilt wurden. Sie hoffen mittlerweile fast 91-jährig das Verfahren durchzuziehen, falls sich damit für sie die einzige Chance ergibt, ihre Unschuld zu belegen. Wie stehen Sie zu dem Verfahren?
Wie zu dem Verfahren?
Ja, es ist ein Saustall. Wenn dein liebes Vaterland, dein deutsches Vaterland, nach 65 Jahren dich als solchen Verbrecher beklagt, das, was sie behaupten, das ist total unwahr. Ich habe nicht das getan, was die behaupten. Und ich kenne die Italiener. Das sind zum Großteil liebe Menschen. Die gleichen lieben Menschen haben mich noch vor 25 Jahren eingeladen nach Monte Cassino zum Dank dafür, dass ich die wertvollsten Gegenstände der Abtei 1943 im Herbst gerettet habe. Und die anderen ordinären Italiener, die greifen mich an und sagen, ich wäre ein Verbrecher. Das ist ein Verbrechen und ich mag mich dazu nicht mehr anders äußern. Amen.
With the questions and answers out of the way, Scheungrubber's legal team suddenly leave us in peace. Once again, we're drinking with an alleged war criminal. But then finally, our friendly approach pays off. Scheungrubber seems to warm to us and tells us he's got something he wants to show us.
Ja, vom Krieg habe ich Foto, wo meine Leute beerdigt werden von anderen Kameraden.
Dann können wir sie sehen?
Ja.
Von Hochzeitstag.
Ja, das ist auch ein Bild, wo sie meine Leute umgebracht haben.
Sie sind Ihre Soldaten.
Das sind meine Soldaten, ja. Das sind die Toten an dem Tag, wo sie jetzt uns verurteilen. Meine Kompanie. Und macht die Beerdigung.
and they have so
Graves.
yes und haben sie beerdigt.
Ja.
Ja. Und da bin ich auch wieder mit dem Rücken
Hier.
zum Bett
Der Kompanieführer.
mit der Kompanieführer. Ja. 1939 begonnen hat, war es die Kriegserklärung. Da sind wir zusammengestanden. Das war der Kompaniechef
Hör mal auf jetzt.
und das waren wir.
10 years vor
1939.
Wo sind Sie?
wo bist du?
Weiß ich nicht.
Also wenn Sie diese Fotos jetzt sehen, welche Erinnerung haben Sie? Gute Erinnerung?
Ja. Ich habe gute Erinnerung, weil ich noch da bin.
Ja.
Ja.
Überlegt, was ist denn der? Ja.
Die anderen sind nicht mehr da.
It feels like after months standing silent in court, Schoengraber's finally trying to explain to us what he sees as the reality of his past.
Gibt diese Erinnerung immer noch frisch oder ist es so lange her?
Wie lange? 65
Habt ihr schon
Jahre.
Schluss gemacht?
Schoengraber's photographs brought home just how messy and brutal his experience of war must have been, how grey the moral lines of his day-to-day life must have seemed. We couldn't judge the events he'd been involved in when he was younger than us, a 25-year-old in charge of a group of men fighting for their lives. But we could judge men who, with hindsight and at the end of their lives, still couldn't see their role in the horrors of the Nazi era.
Well, it's just a firing squad, isn't it? And there as well.
Sandor Capiro has had 60 years to reflect on the 3 nights he'd been involved in rounding up families who were then massacred on the banks of the Danube.
You can see in the photos that it was a freezing cold night in the middle of winter. And that people were taken to the riverbanks and just shot. That's like how well dressed against the cold the officers are or soldiers are, and then the people look half naked. And you see the people have got bare legs, haven't they? It's minus 30 or something.
We're going back to Hungary to see Capiro one last time. He's always welcomed us warmly into his home. Now we're taking photographs of the massacre to show to him, hoping it might trigger some kind of emotional response.
You know, they had to cannonball a hole in the river because it was so thick with ice. So they had to make a hole they could push all the bodies into. I think it's definitely the most sickening sort of single incident that we've had to come across, isn't it?
Good morning.
Wie geht es
Easy.
Ihnen? Hallo.
Easy.
Ja.
Miguel.
No, not Miguel. Charlie. Charlie.
Ah, Charlie.
How are you?
Disculpe.
Despite the fact that it's only 10 in the morning, Capiro, ever the perfect host, has once again cooked us lunch and invited his friend Ava for extra support.
Sie mussten für uns nicht kochen.
Paprika, Stilke, Pesto.
But we're determined that we're not going to be put off from getting the answers we've come for.
These are photographs that a researcher at the BBC has found of Novi Sad. We wanted to show you to see if you have any memories or what you think of them.
Én ezeket nem láttam.
I haven't seen these.
Ahol én voltam, nem volt ez.
Where I was, I couldn't see such things.
A újvidéki razziának két része volt. Két része. Az egyik a személyazonosság megállapítása, azt végezte a csendőrség, csak azt végezte, az igazoltatásokat. A másik rész, a megtorlás rész, azon a csendőrség nem vett részt.
But they were linked, and I know you didn't know what was going to happen, but maybe if you hadn't have taken people, maybe they wouldn't have died.
Hát én megmentettem egy családot, ahol ki akarták végezni őket. Azért mondtam, hogy nálam nem volt fegyverhasználat, mert ahol én voltam, nem volt egy hulla se. Ez borzasztó. Ez borzasztó. De én nem láttam egy hullát se. Ott, ahol én voltam, nem volt fegyverhasználat.
But I didn't see a dead person there.
Ezt én nem láttam.
I didn't see such things. Where I was, these things didn't happen.
It's difficult to work out what Capiro would really have known at the time. But if he saved the family as he claims, then surely he must have known that others were going to be killed.
And children, you remember children?
Gyerekekre nem emlékszem. Én felnőttekre. Ott, ahol én voltam, felnőttek voltak. És aki tudta magát igazolni, azt ott hagyták, ahol vannak. A tisztnek csak az volt a feladata, hogy ne legyen törvényellenes az igazoltatása. Ez engem nagyon komolyan belülről érzem, hogy egy borzalom volt, amit csináltak. De azt nem mi csináltuk, főleg a honvédség csinálta.
Even if he didn't know the consequences of his actions then, he's had the rest of his life to reflect on what did happen.
I suppose we just want to know how you look back on the fact that you were part of something that did things like this to people.
Most még egy nagyon fontos dolgot kell elmeséljek, még egy fontosat. Amikor megérkeztünk január 20-án Újvidékre, akkor tiszti gyűlést tartott a legidősebb parancsnok, tiszti gyűlést tartott. És a tiszti gyűlésen elmagyarázták, hogy 3 napig tart a razzia, mindenki a lakásába tartozik maradni. Én voltam az egyetlen, aki azt mondtam az őrnagyúrnak, mert az őrnagy volt, én főhadnagy, legyen szíves ezt írásba adni. Mert ha írásba adja, akkor a parancsot nem lehet megtagadni. Azért, ami történt. Szóval nagyon fontos, azért kértem, hogy engem bíróság elé állítsanak.
I am very sorry, but what can I...
Hát mit lehet csinálni? Hogy tudom jóvá tenni? Nem tudom jóvá tenni.
What can I do?
De amit mások csináltak, az nekem semmi közöm nincs.
How can I set it right? Shall I stand out in the street and shout, or what? I don't have anything to do with things that other people did.
seems to think that the fact that he never murdered anyone with his own hands completely exonerates him. But his admission that he might have known what was going to happen to the families he rounded up is still shocking for us to hear. For 12 years, millions died at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators, in part because so many blindly fulfilled their orders and managed to convince themselves that they were not responsible. The men and women we'd met were the last of a generation, guilty by association, cogs in a grander machine. We'd been warmly welcomed into their homes, and in some way had got to know each of them. It had been a strange and surreal experience. Whatever the truth of the people we'd met, their lives seemed to have been forever changed by the events of just a handful of days, each of them now facing a lonely end to their very long lives.
The final programme in the series is next Saturday on BBC Two at 10:20. Back to tonight and on BBC Four in a moment to look at the life of Samuel Johnson and his first English dictionary.